Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be real.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back this week. Or I should say, welcome to the whirlwind. I feel like that's what's going on in our country today, and it's relatively positive, which is really nice for a change. Hey, it's Rick Wagner here, getting it right here on KNZZ, KGLN. 1100, 980, 92.7, 101.3. We're on the internet right now. And you can catch our podcast, which is this show cut down, so it's a podcast, if you're interested in that, by generally going to wherever you get your podcasts at, which would be like Apple, or I think we're on iHeart and TuneIn and maybe Spotify. We'll have to check. But so, here's the week, huh? Yeah, the Democrats seem to have have a tiger by the tail. Yeah. Well, it's not even really by the tail. I think that the tiger's got them in its mouth and is carrying them around. That's sort of the way they're acting. Quite a week, huh? I mean, if you gauge your successes by the reaction of the people that are instigating the problems you're trying to solve, it's a pretty good week. I was surprised at, can it possibly be surprised at some of the rhetoric from the left? And I was a little bit. It's wild, man. Elizabeth Warren has started waving her arms around again. Now, we know that Bernie Sanders likes to wave his arms generally over his head. And if he's sitting down, he hunches himself down, so his chin's almost on the desk. Then he waves his hands above his head as though he were some sort of, perhaps, magician or some sort of, magical character, and he's casting a spell somehow. Elizabeth Warren is a little more of the fist beating up in the air, waving around kind of thing that you see oftentimes, in old newsreels of various sort of strong-arm leaders that are berating people about stuff. If you watch these things, like I actually went back on the DVR and turned the sound down and watched some of it, it gets pretty funny. I mean, is it good for them to be that worked up? No. Is it helpful for their cause? I don't think so at all. But they're certainly acting out. What I want to know is how many of them actually believe the stuff they're saying. Some of them do. Some of them are idiots. We know that. We see them out. We see the the Presleys and the Omars and, of course, AOC, who is just like a white-eyed child. It's sort of like a AOC in Wonderland kind of thing, isn't it? Everything's kind of a surprise to her. She's not sure how things work, but she's going to have some say on it. Yeah, that we see that, and gosh. And of course, Al Green, not the singer, is once again, he's also someone that has trouble speaking without keeping his eyes open, which is an interesting thing. But Al is now going to introduce another bill of impeachment against President Trump in the House of Representatives because of his dastardly deeds. And this time they don't have a majority, so I don't think we'll have to go through that again. And I think that it'll probably kind of fall on deaf ears right now, because right now they're trying to figure out a way to impeach Elon Musk, which, of course, you can't do. He's not an impeachable person. I'm not sure. I don't think he even qualifies as an employee. His agency, if it is such a thing, and it is a weird thing, is DOGE is outside of the federal bureaucracy directly. It's an auxiliary arm. They may be receiving some funds to do this work. I'm suspecting they are, although Elon might be funding himself for all I know. But so it's difficult to get at them directly because they're not directly funded by Congress at this point or anything like that. Secondly is, and this is what's interesting, how fast have our friends on the left forgotten the idea of executive power? I mean, we call that, separation of powers and who gets to do what. it was just a couple of months ago, as I recall, that executive orders and power and ideas and everything, they were top notch. And everything about them was legal, and everything about them was just the way it should be. And then January 20th happened, and without us even knowing it, the law must have changed. Well, no, it didn't change. The president, just like the governor of a state, has executive authority over these departments. And I love that no one voted for Elon Musk. That's right. And no one voted for Anthony Blinken or Lloyd Austin or any of the other pinheads that were under the administration of Biden. What about them? Of course they don't vote for them because they're in the executive branch. There's only one person that is directly elected to the executive branch, and that's the president and the vice president on the ticket. Everybody else is appointed by the president and or approved by the Senate. Now, Elon didn't have to be approved by the Senate because it's not a cabinet position or one that they feel like is equivalent to one. And what he's doing is just looking around. This is what's so fascinating about it. And if you listen to what the guys are railing about on the other side, it's hard to understand exactly what he is doing. What's exactly the problem? He's not directly shutting things down. He's not like taking over. He's not like the president, acting as an alter ego. No. And this is very smart, which is interesting, too, because as AOC says, he's a very dumb billionaire. Rockets to space, going to Mars, Starlink for the various communications that we're using, the Boring Company that has had some real success in just doing that. Then, of course, there's Tesla and robotics, and he has a company that has been working on neural networking to help people who have been rendered unable to move their bodies, to accentuate that through electrical implants, neural implants. He's kind of got a lot of stuff going on. And, for someone that's so dumb that came here to this country and started all this on his own, man, he's done really well. If that were the case, if being dumb made you a billionaire, think how rich AOC would be. She'd be fantastically wealthy. Maxine Waters would be the most wealthy woman on earth. But I don't think that's the way it works. So it's enjoyable. By the way, what's really interesting about the work that DOGE is doing and through Musk, and a lot of his people are like 19, 20, 23-year-old. I think the oldest one on his little team is 25, is they're not doing things the traditional way. This is what's freaking the Democrats out. And it's not getting very well reported exactly what's happening, but I read a good article where they went and talked to she was the former director for the IT network for the federal government, kind of overseeing the whole thing. And she just said, well, this is probably a very good way to get into what's going on because all the transactional history is within the network. So instead of going after position pages and trying to track people down and seeing what they're going directly into the system and pulling up the transactions because they have to be somewhere. Why? Because they're paying people. They're paying people money. So they have to attach it to something. So that transactional history lives within the data banks of the deep state. Elon has figured out that if I just go in there and look and see where the money's going, where the contracts are going, and what it's attached to, we'll have a pretty good idea what's going on. And he's able to do it so fast because, one, his people are good. Two, he's able to leverage a lot of his own abilities, and some, I'm sure, probably some AI and a few things like that, to go through it very, very fast. So when he lands on one of these things, he is able to pull stuff out. Crazy things, lots of money spent, almost immediately. These guys on the left can't keep up with that. They can't really block it. They don't know how. And they can't keep up with when you start talking about getting rid of USAID. I mean, they thought you'd go through, a couple years fighting about it, this and that. Well, no, that's not what's happening. What's happening is all of the stuff, crazy stuff that we would like to know and would take forever to get out from these guys. You know what the FOIA information from these characters would be like? They'd probably be lying down in the doorways to keep people from getting it. Instead, we know what they're spending money on because somebody that understands the system is accessing the system. It's not national security stuff. It's just bookkeeping, counting. and he's going right at it. So he has the data to talk about some of these programs and destinations for money almost right away. They don't know how to handle that. We'll be back. Okay, everybody, we're back. So let's finish this discussion a little bit of what's going on with the Department of Government Efficiency and how it has turned the hair first white and then on fire for most of the liberal intelligentsia out there. Can we use the word intelligentsia with a lot of those? No, we can't. So how do they fight back? Well, how do they usually fight back? First is to call everybody some sort of ist or ism, right? So I noticed, later in this week that one of his staffers quits because they went back and everybody went back, and if you're going to do something like this, then people are going to go through and analyze everything you've ever done. And if you've been on social media for a while and you're popping off all the time, particularly if you're a little younger, there's going to be stuff there that you don't like and that you don't feel the same way about or whatever. So they're doing that because they found out who the staffers were because they were outed by another liberal outlet. So they've been pounding the internet to try and find dirt or problems with these guys. And so with one of them, apparently he had some tweets they didn't like, and I don't know when it was. And so he's just going to leave. And that's not going to do him any good because the guys that Elon is using for this are, they're not exactly, a dime a dozen, but they're not super rare. And if you have a good judgment about who's good at this, like Elon does, then you can find somebody else. Now, the difficult thing is vetting people. How long are you going to let somebody spend going through every moment of their online life, especially? And when you're using younger people who have been online, social media, tweets, you name it, for most of their semi-adult life, from teens up, you're going to find a lot of weird stuff. It takes a little time, but you'll find it. People don't know what they're saying, or they agree with something. What they really like is to find some really strange, weird, or controversial tweet or something like that, and then find out that one of the people they're looking for had a like on that. He liked that, which, okay. So there's a lot of that going on. And it will continue to go on until they finally get a crew in there that, once they're doxed, as they like to say, which is, publish who they are, their addresses and everything else, that is really kind of bulletproof. And I don't know. I mean, nobody's really that way. And other things can be misinterpreted or interpreted. So we'll see how that goes. And of course, they want to hurt Elon's businesses. They have a hard time doing that because he already has a lot of money. And his businesses are pretty much the best at what they're doing. SpaceX is doing more space-related launches, satellites, stuff like that, than NASA by a big factor. Matter of fact, they're doing a lot of it for NASA. And we've seen how these things are going. Even as I speak, remember there's a couple of astronauts up there in the space station that were supposed to be up there for 8 days. And because of the problem with the Starliner that took them up there, they've been there for 8 months. That's a big difference. Now, they seem chipper enough. I got to hand it to them. But I didn't know the other day, the female had said that she was wondering when she got back to Earth if she could remember how to walk. Because, there's floating in space. There's no gravity in there. And it's difficult to exercise. There's a real problem and technique to try and exercise the body in essentially a weightless environment. And the body wants weight. It wants to know where it has to put its musculature, how to allocate its movements, and all of these kinds of things. Plus, your bone density has something to do with how much weight you're bearing. So all of these things are not happening when you're weightless. We're not even sure about all of the things that happen over extended weightlessness. These guys are starting to get up there in a fairly high amount of time. And my guess is that when they come back, and Trump has asked Elon to try and get them back with one of his spaceships, that they're going to be really kind of miserable. They're going to have their muscles going to atrophy. Some of their internal organs will probably be acting a little different because your body, for instance, as you know this, operates a lot on gravity. Right now, you have muscular control that moves food through your system and so forth, but still part of it is still kind of a gravity-fed situation because you were developed in gravity. To not have gravity has a tendency to make the organs for certain things like the stomach and so forth a little confused about what they should be doing. And they do something and it doesn't act like they thought it should. We're pretty complex creatures, and so extended periods of weightlessness like that are something that, well, they try and study, but I don't think the best way to study it is just put somebody up there randomly and then when they've been up there a long time, see how bad they are. I don't think that's really probably the way to go, but we might get some good data off them, these poor people up there. I don't know how most people would feel about being stranded in orbit for 8 months when you're supposed to be back in less than 2 weeks, 8 days. They got a pretty good attitude for it. I probably would be a little more upset at everything with that. Like, why don't you get me home? What's wrong with you people? And these guys have got better instincts on that, I guess. So there's this perpetual battle. The second line of defense against making things run correctly is, of course, the courts. The Democrats have been jamming themselves through the court doors, sort of like a water balloon through a keyhole, trying to get to the courts and find the right judges. Because these are going to be federal judges. And as we said, they'll shop around to try and find a federal judge that they think was probably going to be sympathetic to that, because a lot of these executive orders affect every place in the United States. So they'll find somebody that they, know is going to be sympathetic to this idea, and they'll trundle in there and get the judge to say, "Ooh, no, we got to pause that." And so they found a judge. Let's see, what was it, Thursday night, to stop the buyout. Isn't that interesting? Trump had, and Musk put this together too, to be fair, they had a buyout offer to 2 million federal workers to take essentially an early retirement package. And last I heard, I think they had 24,000. I'm sure there's more than that now. People say, okay, I'd probably do that. Well, you can imagine what happens in the Democrat side of things, where they rely on those people to rely on the government for money. So they're pretty good Democrat voters. Now, a lot of these people may not feel that way once they're not working for the feds anymore, or that they have their income comes from some other portion of it. So they're no longer quite the unionized whatchamacallits for the Democrats. So they don't like that. I mean, that's really kind of moderating the term. And so they're all over that. They want to stop that. And when you think about it, why? I mean, take the politics out of it, which is next to impossible. But if you want to downsize your company and you think it's running inefficiently and you have plenty of data to show you that's the case, and that you're overstaffed and there are certain places where you have people working that you shouldn't even have them working, you would do something like this. It would be a smart way, and it would be kind of a gentle way to say, look, if you want to go, you can go, and we'll give you a bonus package on your way out the door. And that would be something actually that in a lot of companies, their stock would go up if they did that, because they cut back on their personnel, and that cuts back not only on wages and benefits, but all the other, unfortunately, ancillary stuff that comes with having a lot of employees anymore, getting sued, having the union be a problem, this, that, and the other thing. So it's generally seen as a positive thing if you're trying to get leaner and meaner. Well, the federal government, to the Democrats, can never be leaner. I mean, it could be meaner, that's for sure, but it can't be leaner. It can't be shrinking. I mean, I think that the shrinking federal government causes many of these people, Chuck Schumer, for instance, to rise shrieking from their beds, just to the dreaming of it. And if you've watched some of the interplay of these guys, like we talked about in the last section, waving their arms around, Schumer tries to act like he's rabble-rousing. It's very much like Al Gore used to do, where you've got somebody that's basically a stick of wood, and he realizes that he has to look like he's all agitated. So the way he does that is he just gets louder and moves his arms around. And there's something about it. Humans can kind of they can kind of sense when the emotional aspects are real. And you look at it, it's just not. It's just not real. And Schumer is, I'm sure, very upset, but not in the way he's trying to act. He's trying to act like, like he's leading the French Revolution or something. And he's so sad at trying to do that. Now, there's some people out there like Cory Booker, the senator who is, Spartacus, you may remember, who was really unhinged, railing away. And, of course, Elizabeth Warren. We'll see how that turns out. I think this is all going to be a bad idea for them because they are throwing themselves into a battle over something that most of the people on the outside are in favor of. Let's cut the government problems, especially going after USAID, where a lot of the money spent is sent either out of the country or to NGOs that do bizarre things with it. And when you have people in California and North Carolina who are really hurting and really need some government assistance, and you're throwing money for transgender comics in Peru, that has a tendency to make it hard for people to support. Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, we'll be back in a minute, folks. Hey, everybody, thanks for sticking around. We're in our third section here, and we're going to do a little something that we've done before, and I got good feedback on. We're getting our military historian out there, Ryan, from the far reaches where, these international men of mysteries. You never know where they're at. Could be Monte Carlo, could be Paris, might be flying down to Rio. You never know. But he's working on a lot of his masters of military history. And, here's another funny thing. If you're going to do something about military history, you got to know something about regular history, too. It's just how that kind of works. These things don't appear out of nowhere. And so I wanted to talk to Ryan today. I wanted to get him on and talk about something that's a little different than we're getting from the news cycle. We have a tendency to find two or three things and talk about them all the time. And then there's sort of a secondary issues out there that are probably pretty important that we're not talking about as much. Now, they're not as photogenic. You don't have Chuck Schumer trying to pretend like he can move his arms and legs around, stuff like that. But it is an important thing. And I want to talk a little about the area that's adjacent essentially to what's going on in the Israel-Gaza thing is, the whole Red Sea Suez Canal area and how important that is. And there's stuff going on right now in it. And we remember there was a big problem with it, like a year ago. Then we kind of quit hearing about it after we made some bombing runs in there. But it didn't really solve the problem. We just decided to move on from it. And so Ryan and I are going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, where we're at, we're not as familiar with the Suez Canal as we are the Panama, but it's a big thing. It was something that they were thinking about digging from, 1600s. Because they could tell how important it would be to get there. Because once you get in the Red Sea, you don't have to sail around Africa, which is, the Cape of Good Hope is a long ways away from, say, Syracuse. So it was a big deal. And the French did it. I think that they were, 1859 to 1869, took them 10 years. That's why they tried the Panama Canal. But as Ryan and I were speaking off the air there a little bit, I mean, they had one advantage, which was they weren't all dying from malaria like the French were originally when they were trying to dig it. But they had plenty of people dying from heat stroke and other things. It was not a fun thing. About 20% of the world's shipping goes through that thing. And that's a lot. And the 20% that goes through it often were these big container ships, oil container ships that are, big, aircraft carrier kind of big. They've stopped going through there over this last year. Most of the container shipping and those kinds of things have started to go around Africa. You can imagine how that takes not only more time, but it's a lot more expensive. And why are they doing that? Well, it's because we haven't solved this problem with people shooting rockets and things at the ships going through there. So, but we haven't talked about that, but it's pretty important. So I thought we'd talk about it. The Suez, it's just such an interesting spot. I mean, you go back to, like I said, the 15 or 1600s, and people sailing in that area could think, geez, if there was just a little way to dig a trench through here. And once it was done, it became a very important part. It was originally an area that's part of the Ottoman Empire that we remember from World War I, that they lost a lot of that. the British moved in there and kind of took over Egypt. What is it, about 1870 or something, Ryan? Is that kind of period?
Yeah, right about in that time frame, they became a British protectorate, and then it wasn't till after the Second World War and the end of colonialism, or the end of the colonial era, when all the European nations were trying to distance themselves from the colonial European power oppressors of the unfortunate, that they gave it back to the Egyptians.
But they turned it over to their own local oppressors and so forth.
Yeah, they turned it over to their own local oppressors, and it was such a big deal that there was actually a war in 1956 fought over it with the French, the British against, and the Israelis as the scapegoats against Egypt, because Egypt nationalized it at that point in time.
Right.
So
that was under Nasser, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was under Nasser.
They just decided that it was theirs.
Well, they were in huge dire straits at that point in time. Nasser inherited pretty much a broke nation. You know, everybody was broke after the Second World War and all of the death and destruction and all of that. So he was looking for a relative quick means to replenish the coffers, and the way to do that would be to tax the transit through the Suez Canal. So he decided that at that point in time it was theirs, and they fought a little war, a war that Britain would rather forget. Eisenhower was staunchly against it, and Britain kind of went ahead and did it anyways, believing that the United States would kind of pull the same thing that they did in World War II and go, oh, okay, I guess we'll join along. And Eisenhower wanted nothing to do with it and rebuffed the British heavily for it. So the British, pulled out quickly, and it's been, Egyptian ever since. But yeah, it's a huge lifeline. I mean, it was a huge means of moving oil, in particularly to the Mediterranean from the Persian Gulf, and all of those cargo ships like you were talking about. But yeah, having to go around the Cape of Good Horn, which tacks on thousands of miles, untold thousands of miles, which is probably not inherently what has caused a bit of inflation, but it darn sure doesn't hurt. So.
No, there's problems the problems traditionally down there, because everybody will remember that, you sail through the Red Sea and then you keep heading down towards the Horn of Africa and you run into the Somali pirates and all those sorts of things. So it's always had its own set of problems, but this terrorism down there has been a real problem. And we kind of shot a few missiles at them and kind of got it a little better, but not enough to where people felt like they wanted to send their container ships through. And they're still there messing around. And aren't they out of Qatar
Yemen.
or Yemen? That's right.
Yeah, there's the Yemen, the Yemenis, they're terrorist organizations, as with most radical terrorist organizations in that neck of the woods, are all subsidized by the Iranians. And yeah, it's one means of, it's a very good way, I guess, to get world attention, to launch a couple of missiles or try to bomb container ships or try to board container ships. I mean, you get the world to know your point of view and your, I guess, your plight a lot easier than just, conflict within your own country. So it's a very vocal way of showing the world that, hey, we're here. And unfortunately, the ramifications for everybody else is you have to pay more, and everybody doesn't want to use that anymore. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot doing that, because the traffic has dropped off quite a bit. But yeah,
we're all paying.
You have the Iranians.
Yeah, we're all paying a price for that, though, which we don't, realize by the time you add those shipping costs to many things, including energy, and stuff like that it adds to our, supply chain costs. Steaming around Africa is a lot more expensive. And Yemen, by the way, is on the east side of the Red Sea, and Egypt is on the west. And
then you have Somalia on the west side. So you're kind of wedged in there. And we all know, especially with the plight of, Captain Phillips and his ordeal on the little life raft and the amazing job that the 3 Navy SEAL snipers did taking out those captors. But yeah, you have the Yemenis on one side that, will just try to blow up the ship if they can't board it. And then you have the Somalis on the other side that damn sure try to board it. And then, they try to ransom either the ship or the crew. Typically the crew. The crew's a little bit easier to scoop off when you're only in a 20-foot, donga.
Yeah, that's right.
And then instead of trying to do anything with a 1,000-foot long container ship.
Yeah, trying to get that into your village port is not going to work very well for you. But
there's not quite. The launch ramps for those are few and far between in Somalia. So is most everything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are few and far between in Somalia. Law and order, non-chaotic murdering, things like that. Non-tribal warfare and warlords and it's a crazy. If you look into it, it's a crazy area. Yeah. Congo's probably the only place worse in Africa right now. Yeah, that's right. They've been getting worse in the Republic of the Congo. Just give everybody a run for their money there. Yeah, well, you're bordered with Uganda, and that's just a horrible place in and of itself. Just a little bit outside of the spectrum of where we're talking, but yeah, there's a lot of that the Red Sea and the Suez Canal just sits in a whole area that's just been at the heart of conflict and contention for centuries. Centuries. Right. And you were talking about the Ottomans and the Persians, and more recently the Germans, and then now you have Islamic fundamentalists. So it's an area of the world that just has not seen a lot of peace over its entire human history, human existence. It's too valuable. It's accessible, and it's narrow in a lot of places. And even though it looks wider when you take a picture of it, the channeling to get a big boat through there is pretty narrow. Yeah, it's one boat at a time. It's one ship at a time in certain areas where so it's not an easily navigable waterway in and of itself, but it's far easier than going around the Cape of Good Horn. Cape of Good Hope. Don't forget the Hope. Cape of Good Hope, excuse me, not the Horn of Africa, Yeah, well, what I was going to say, too, is that because of that channeling, any larger ship, container ships, oil ships, stuff like that, they can't get out of the way of anything. They also don't move real fast. So it's sort of like, imagine that you're sitting at one of those carnivals where, a little boat might go around on a metal boat, might go around, you're shooting with a BB gun. Yeah, it's like that, only closer. Also, it's very difficult to take a container ship and go serpentine with it to try and not let them hit you. It doesn't happen. So they're very vulnerable in there. And there's a couple of places where, because of the channeling in there, they're very close to both sides, but really Yemen. And because Yemen is about controlled, maybe 30-40% is controlled by these Houthi terrorists. They have a lot of free reign along there. And people were I was talking to some people about this, and they said, well, didn't we blow those guys up at some and this and that? Yeah, we tried to do a little of that under Biden, but it was sort of a half-hearted effort. And part of it is it's a new kind of warfare on there, these guys. These guys are all in tacticals, which is, just basically an old Datsun pickup with, a rocket launcher mounted on it. With a Dishka. Yeah, with a recoilless rifle or a Dishka. But, a lot of that's happening actually in the Red Sea because, for the most part, the Suez runs right through Egypt, the Sinai on one side, and so you still get those people that are, can get relatively close, and Egypt is not a humongously stable country. It's come a long ways, and it's not quite as bad as it was, maybe 10 years ago. But it's still very easy to get within a stone's throw of any of those ships. So,
yeah, it's just a treacherous area, and as you know, as we've seen, people are just avoiding it like the plague. They'd rather go all the way around and go into the South Sea, which is horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, and as we can tell from some of the Ukraine action, the drone warfare and some of the things that they've been able to develop now that are really pretty cheap, comparatively speaking, to do.
Yeah.
Just, wiring a bomb to some of these things and flying it out and crashing it into something can do a whole lot of damage, and it doesn't cost you as much money as you might think, especially when Iran is paying for it. And
sure, no, it's high-tech, low-tech stuff. I mean, nowadays it's considered low-tech because of all of, we have spy satellites and drones that can fly themselves from a shipping container themselves in the United States over places in the Middle East. And, that's pretty mind-boggling, but so are those little drones. I have a little drone, and I mean, they're high-tech, but they're really low-tech compared to what we have. And yeah, all you have to do is strap C4 or some sort of high explosives on it, and you make yourself a very easy bomb that, you can put it up in the air and drop it right on the deck of something, or, so it brings a whole new dynamic to the way in which things work in the world. Unfortunately, as technology goes along, all of these things that are super high tech nowadays become relatively cheap with Chinese made knockoffs, and then you have the Iranians that are, they now have drone technology,
which they got from us, it appears.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. It seems that all of them have, but that, I guess, what happens when you have top secret military contractors that utilize parts from China, so it's not too hard to reverse engineer when you're shipping all the components from China to the United States to have them built, which that in and of itself is another conversation and mind-boggling in my thought process. We
keep discovering that kind of stuff. We discovered a lot during the pandemic about how much of our pharmaceuticals are made in China.
Sure.
And
that's what I guess they're worried about nowadays with tariffs and our tariffs on China is how much pharmaceuticals are going to go up. With, is anything built in the United States anymore, Rick?
We start not seeing that happening in the United States very much when you start looking at where everything is made. And a lot of things that you think are made in the United States are just assembled in the United States, and the majority of their parts come from someplace else. But once
it's kind of like your truck that says that it's assembled in Mexico, but 97% of the parts come from the United States and Canada. It's not hard for those people to just take everything that we ship them, take a look at it, and build it themselves.
Yeah, people realize, I think, that the Chinese do not pay a whole lot of attention to copyright and patents. And
no, they don't play. They play by the Chinese rules, which is their own.
Yeah, which is, if we can make it ourselves, that's it. Well, in the drone technology in places that at choke points like at the Suez and stuff like that, I mean, it really does change things. And we talked about a couple of weeks ago in Ukraine about how, these fairly low-cost drones were really being used to immobilize our very expensive Abrams tanks and things like that. So they had to put like chicken wire around their turrets and things like that. And the same thing for the shipping is, some of the defense systems on ships that do have them are set up for a little more sophisticated weaponry, actually. And so the point defense systems just aren't very good at having this sort of erratic fly coming at them from the coast, which is the drone, and which can go up and down and left and right and all these. You can't predict its flight path as well, and it's
slow, comparatively slow. I mean, a lot of those self-defense, like like the Gatling guns that they have on Navy destroyers and stuff, Sea-Whiz. Those are designed for, the slowest thing would be a helicopter, but its radar signature is huge. Radar signature from a helicopter is thousands of times larger than one of these drones with just a couple of pounds of of explosives. And when you're flying a drone 2 feet off the ground, I don't care what kind of radar you have. I mean, I'm sure we have something that'll pick them up, but you're not looking for that. I mean, most people would see that and say it's a flock of birds or two birds, let alone something flying at you with destructive capabilities. So, yeah, plus, thinking about this, the ramifications of all of these terrorist organizations coming into the limelight with 9/11 and all of the Middle East and ISIS and all of this, they've lost tens and hundreds of thousands of fighters. So if they're able to get their point across with a small drone and not end up killing all of their people, which, there has to be a point in time that you're just at a diminishing point of return. So, being able to use something like this where you're not getting a handful of fundamentalists that, it takes time and effort and resources to train and get them all ginned up to conduct holy wars.
Sure, but, you got to get them out there. It's harder when a lot of them that don't drink, so they got to figure out other ways to do it. And what I wanted to say
and
too
72 Bedford virgins, I mean that sounds pretty cool.
Sounds good.
That whole blowing yourself up to oblivion to do it. There's human nature is to not blow yourself.
Well, there's
up.
a price.
So,
there's a price to pay for everything. Anything that's cool, right? And what I also wanted to say was this Mideast issues that we have. We have Turkey out there. And as I mentioned earlier, the Ottoman Turks, which is, pretty much now Turkey, had control of all that area. And we've talked about that before. They lost it during World War I. Well, Turkey is part of NATO. And although you wouldn't know it sometimes, they seem to be kind of going their own way and buddying up to people that are really not friends to NATO. And there's a lot of speculation if things went really sideways in the Middle East that maybe Turkey would, move down and start messing around with the Suez and things like that because it's not that far away. And depending on who they're hooking up with.
No, it's not that far away. But, I think that they have a lot of their own problems. And I think that a lot of the rift that is come with that has stemmed from our backing of the Kurdish rebels in the north of Iran and Iraq. And Kurds, for the Turks, are a terrorist organization. They're the PLK, I want to say.
Yeah, they're up in is it the BTK? But they're BTK, right. They're really across the border, a lot across the border between Iraq and Turkey, and it's a real problem for them because it's a more difficult region to ferret people out of too. So,
it hits really close to home. It would be like the rest of NATO saying that, hey, we stand behind all of these illegal immigrants trying to get into the United States, and, you're going to cause a rift there. So I can, why you don't want to let something like that.
Yeah, Ryan, we're running out of time. So, but I'll talk to you in a little bit, and thanks a lot for joining us. And it's just something to think about, folks. A lot more going on in the world than we like to hear. We need to think about
thanks for listening.
We'll be back next week.
If you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them will take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.